Sports Beat Live, Week 18. I think this is the first time ever we get to say Week 18 with the NFL pushing out the games to 17. Hey, you know what? I'm joined by my colleagues, columnist Vahe Gregorian. I don't see the cup of coffee, my man. Where's the cup of coffee?
I got the Johnny Robinson Boys Home mug today going for your pleasure, Herbie. I almost wore a Penn football jersey after your discovery last week, but I thought I'd keep that to, ourselves.
Hey, I've always known that you were a Division I athlete, my man. Also joining us, my esteemed partner, Sam McDowell. Good morning, Sam. You're not wearing the all-juice shirt. You didn't get the memo?
You guys are wearing this thing every week. I'm starting to wonder if you're washing this between shows.
You don't need to wonder. I just keep wearing it.
we send it, we mail it back and forth, to see if we fit each other's clothes. But you know what? All right, that was too much information. Gentlemen, the Broncos obviously get ready to play host to the Kansas City Chiefs. Last week, coming off of a loss. Before we look at the Broncos game, we got to look back at two specific plays that have come up a lot this week. Andy Reid said Tuesday, we're on to the Broncos. But unfortunately, there were two plays that continue to stand out in the 34-31 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals last weekend. Specifically, the 3rd and 27 play, and the other one, the freeway play that never materialized. Sam, let's start with you. 3rd and 27, I know you've written about it a couple times already this week because it does keep coming up. Walk us through what happened on that 3rd and 27 play against the Bengals, please.
Well, I mean, it's the biggest play of the game in terms of the impact on the game. So, it's the conversion with, 3.5 minutes left to Jamar Chase on Charvarius Ward, one-on-one down the sideline. And there's a question about whether or not Charvarius Ward should have been left one-on-one against a guy that had already had 250 yards on him by that point. And the reason he was one-on-one is the Chiefs brought an all-out blitz. So we've asked Steve Spagnuolo about it. To his credit, whether you agree with his decision or not, he explained why he arrived at that decision, and it was, they were at the 41-yard line. It was 3rd down 27. If we force an incomplete pass here, they're going to have to punt, and they're going to wind up with 0. But unfortunately for the Chiefs, Joe Burrow wasn't thinking about just getting in field goal range either. He was actually quoted after the game as saying, "We know who's on the other sideline," referring to Patrick Mahomes. "We can't settle for 3. We've got to get 7. So that call of the all-out blitz played into the Bengals' hand because they were left with one-on-one coverage with their stud on the outside, and it resulted in a first down that set up the game-winning field goal and left the Chiefs with no time to match.
Vahe, I know you wrote a column on this game, on that play after the game. And Sam just articulated exactly what occurred there. From a columnist point of view, what did that play do to the Chiefs' psyche?
Well, look, first of all, I don't remember and it's probably happened, but a few years ago, this is maybe the most hindsight heavy kind of week I can recall since Andy Reid's been here. Just the feeling of so many things that could have been done differently that would have quite possibly anyway, led to winning the game. So the 3rd and 27 is right at the core of that. I think that you can make a case that there were many different reasons they lost this game, right? There were many different reasons they lost this game, but the one play that really it pivoted on in a lot of ways was that play, simply because it was controllable in their approach, and they even the ramifications of giving up 20 yards there are that you give up a field goal at worst case scenario. So I just think it was a really an important miscalculation. And I think one of the reasons we're talking about it is not only how it affected them in terms of their seeding, but what it says about their ability to adjust on the fly after so many things have been going so well these last couple of months. So it it just for their sake, for both the coaching staff and the players, I hope it's a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, and they needed a wake-up call. And you mentioned adjusting on the fly. And I'm going to pose this question to both of you. How surprising was it, given the game that Jamar Chase was having, that they continued to lock up Jamar Chase one-on-one? Specifically Charvarius Ward. Charvarius Ward was beat on that play. He was beat on an 18-yard touchdown. And so when you have a guy who's just going off, and Spagnuolo was a guy who can adjust during the game, but he didn't seem to want to adjust coverage on Jamar Chase. How surprising was that to you, Sam?
Well, he's in a difficult spot there because the calls that he went with during the game were calls that are, you could point to this defensive midseason turnaround and say that's the reason the Chiefs have gotten better. He blitzes a lot. They blitz the 8th most in the NFL. They get the 2nd most hurries in the NFL in terms of percentage of opposing quarterbacks drops back. So he's decided we're going with our strength. But the other side of that is what Herbie just mentioned, which is the adjustments. At what point do you decide, hey, our strength isn't working today, therefore we have to just guard against what the other team's strength is? And that's the decision he was left with on a play like that, 3rd and 27. And obviously, the decision he chose is what cost him dearly. And at the end of that game, it prevented Patrick Mahomes from getting on the field. And anytime you make a decision that prevents Patrick Mahomes from getting on the field with a chance to match, obviously ends up being the wrong decision.
Vahe, your thoughts?
Well, right along those lines. And I think, when did the Chiefs score that tying field goal with 6:01 left, right? And there were any number of ways which, Sam McDowell kind of got into the essence of the the final moments in what he wrote and how he's explored that. So we'll talk more about that. But that's the crux of this whole thing that was so distressing about the last 6 minutes. The Chiefs played as if they had some journeyman quarterback, and they were going to be desperate if they were down 3 points with 3 minutes left. And that's not the situation. You have Patrick Mahomes and some pretty good receivers and 3 timeouts. I think they didn't play as if they were the complementary team that we've seen them come to be. They didn't seem to be thinking about all gears engaging together.
That's a great point, Vahe, because the communication between usually what we see on offense is the communication between series, and usually that includes Eric Bieniemy, it includes Andy Reid, and they get some input from other guys upstairs about, hey, what are we thinking on this next series? And then there's constant communication for the same way with the defense, with Steve Spagnuolo and his defensive assistant coaches. In this case, you need the offense and the defensive guys talking together. And ultimately, of course, that's on Andy Reid. I mean, he's the one in charge of it all. But it has to factor in your defensive call that you've got Patrick Mahomes on the sideline. And holding him to 0 points is not the objective there. Getting 3 points out of that drive and just asking Patrick Mahomes to go get 3 with plenty of time left by that, I guarantee you the Bengals didn't want the ball back in Patrick Mahomes' hands down 3 with 3 minutes left, especially when a touchdown wins the game at that point. So it's just, I thought that Andy Reid is as prepared as they come. I did not think that looked like his most prepared moment at the end of that game.
And Sam, you bring up a phenomenal point about the Bengals probably not wanting Mahomes to have the ball in his hands, because that 3rd and 27 play obviously set up the game-winning score. And this leads us to the freeway. Bengals are now down inside the 10-yard line. The clock is ticking. At what point should the Chiefs have said, okay, we got to let these guys score. There's not a lot of time left on the clock. We got 3 timeouts. Let them score so we can get the ball back in Mahomes' hand. But, of course, they allowed them to convert a first down, and then the penalty in the end zone against, I think that was L'Jarius Sneed, illegal hands to the face, and the Bengals are able to run the clock out. But when at that point should they have allowed them to score? Let's start with you, Vahe.
Well, first of all, I want to make one suggestion. I was really pleased that Anthony Hitchens told us the name of the play was Freeway, but I think they need to have a little bit of an evolution and call it the Autobahn or something, where they're actually pulling guys into the end zone. because it was a different sort of battle of wills there, right? I mean, the notion that the Bengals were going to keep trying to milk it, and that the Chiefs got themselves more and more helpless as it went. You know, the way I keep thinking about the penalties, and it is, again, to use Sam Mellinger's favorite term, it is the ballot of the loser. But there was a clear flinch on one play. There were so many things that happened in, what was it, 8 plays from inside the 2. Sam, I think you dug into it more precisely than I did. I just think that it was a sequence that the Chiefs just didn't manage properly, is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, they ran the last 7 plays from the 1 yard line when you include the kneel downs. So there's a few options here. You know, the Bengals get I think part of the thought process in the 3rd and 27 blitz, because these are more related than I think people think they are, is if you get beat on that, typically that's going to wind up being a touchdown. You know, the Chiefs, I hate to say caught a bad break, but I guess I should say an unusual break, and that play was a first down but not a touchdown. So now the Bengals have an opportunity to burn more time off the clock. Even more odd is that it's a first down but not inside the 10-yard line. So now they're a situation where they can still gain a first down without getting the touchdown, and now there's another 3 plays that they're able to take off the clock and eat up Chiefs timeouts and time. And so I think you've got an opportunity there. You could decide 1st and 10 at the 11. This is a time to let them score. I think it's too early because the Chiefs have 3 timeouts and 3 minutes left. And I think that's more than enough time to ask Patrick Mahomes and the offense to go down the field, especially against a Bengals secondary that struggles. Was that Ralph that disagreed with me there, Bob?
It was actually Goldie, who doesn't usually pipe up about anything.
Maybe she was just saying great point. But I think especially once the Bengals get the first down without getting the touchdown, when Joe Mixon runs that, at that point you've got to let him in the end zone. You still have the 2-minute warning, 2 timeouts, and the Bengals decide to quarterback sneak. I thought it was a mistake. I thought the Bengals played in the Chiefs' hands there. I think if they kneel the ball and make the Chiefs go the full length of the field, make them eat up their timeouts, then I think that was the better move, but they don't. I think once they quarterback sneak, you've got to – like I said after Sunday's game, to use an Eric Bieniemy phrase, you got to drag his butt across the finish line there and then just take the time and go down and score. And to me, the decision becomes, do I want to put more onus on my defense here to make the plays? And by the way, they have to make 3 plays. Or do I want to make the onus on Patrick Mahomes? And I'm going to choose the guy I'm paying $500 million to do the heavy lifting there.
And I can't agree with both of y'all more. I think if anything, the Bengals signaled their intent that they were going to try to score a touchdown as the clock was dwindling. And at some point, yes, you do have pride, defensive pride. Let's stuff them. But the call should have been, that freeway call, I think, should have went to Anthony Hitchens a lot sooner than it did, because that loss combined with the Titans win seemed to change everything going into this final weekend. Now we got 2 11-5 teams, and this transitions to Denver. Sam, starting with you, if you could please detail what's at stake here as we enter this final weekend.
Yeah, I mean, so the Chiefs are they're looking at the number 2 seed. They're looking at, doing something for the first time since Patrick Mahomes became a starting quarterback, which is playing on wild card weekend. And, in order for that not to happen, the Titans would have to lose to the Texans and the Chiefs would have to beat the Broncos. And if you simulate those on some computer models, they give that that combination about a 20% chance of happening, of the Chiefs regaining the number 1 seed, which is what they lost on Sunday in Cincinnati. So it's an 80% chance that we're watching Patrick Mahomes play next week at AFC wildcard weekend. The last 3 weeks, he's just sat at home and watched that weekend. So, yeah, there's a ton at stake this weekend. And, the oddity, of course, is that the Chiefs play first. So they've got to play their guys. Obviously, if the Titans had this game, the Chiefs could potentially rest some guys. And that's part of the reason I think the NFL switched this game to Saturdays, to make sure that, one of their primetime teams with a lot of star players is putting those star players on the field on Saturday.
And not only that, I think they also moved that so it prevents the scoreboard watching, so to speak. So instead of the Chiefs having to concentrate on what's going on in Tennessee, they'll know what's happening from their living room couches. Vahe, the Chiefs all this week have said, we got to have short memory. We got to have short memory. You know, the Cincinnati Bengals loss aside, can they have a short memory coming into this game knowing what's at stake?
I think they will. And you know, there's every reason to think that the Chiefs will and should have a bitter taste in their mouth from the way they lost this last game and what that meant in this. Now, it is one of those classic cliche scenarios where you don't want to lose, make the first game, you know, feed into the second straight loss. I mean, this because of the way it's worked out, they got to play to win. And this game has great meaning. Sam, I think you've looked at this harder than I have, but you know, it's not just one or two is in question here. It's a whole matrix of things depending on how three other teams with 10-6 records go if the Chiefs don't win.
Yeah, you know,
or 11-6. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know, I think some of these other teams that could potentially hop them. You know, it seems like the Bengals are going to rest Joe Burrow and potentially rest some other guys as well, and just concede the fact that they could be that number 2. Now, maybe I don't know if they would change course if the Chiefs lost on Saturday, since they will have that information first. But it seems like that's their plan as of now. But yeah, I mean, technically the Chiefs could fall too, you know, if they lose. And regardless, and this is something else that I've looked at, I mean, the AFC path is considerably more difficult than what it's been for this team the last 2 years. When you look at just the quality of teams they would have to face overall, you know, when you go back to 19, you know, some of the analytics rated the Tennessee Titans as a below average football team, and they played them in the AFC Championship to get to the Super Bowl. They don't rate the Chargers as a below average football team. They don't rate the Colts as a below average football team. Those are the most likely teams that the Chiefs will have to face in the first round. And we haven't even gotten to the potential of Buffalo and New England. I mean, those are 2 top 5 caliber football teams. So the Chiefs' path is undoubtedly going to be more difficult. I mean, could they still win the Super Bowl? Absolutely. And they're still favored on a lot of these metrics, but not to the same extent that they were the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think if anything, you know, as much as we would like to move on from the Bengals game, unfortunately we can't, because when you look at the playoff implications, the Chiefs clearly shot themselves in the foot by losing that game on 2 notable scenarios. But when we look at the Broncos, the Chiefs, this is the perfect opponent for them, in my opinion. Obviously, they're going for a 13th straight win. The Broncos have all kinds of discombobulation over there. Their starting quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater, on injured reserve, and this is now opening the door for Drew Lock to once again be the starter. Sam, you did a lot of coverage of Drew Lock. I'll never forget that Zoom call in, I think that was last year, and you posed a question to him, and before he answered, he said, "Hey, how you doing, buddy?" So there's clearly some kind of relationship there. You've covered him. Is he the answer for the Broncos going forward, and what can the Chiefs expect from him on Saturday?
Yeah, you know, I think that the Broncos made a mistake by not figuring that answer out themselves this year. You know, they went with Teddy Bridgewater this year, and maybe that told us that they've already determined that the answer is no, that he's not their future. But I just thought that the margin between Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock was so small that you just had to play the younger guy and see what you had. And because they didn't, we don't have a lot of tape on Drew Lock from this year to see if he's made progression from year 2 to year 3. And it's become a much more difficult question to answer. And by the way, the Broncos have gotten nothing out of it. They're not going to make the playoffs this year. And if they didn't make the playoffs, but at least they knew the answer to that question you just asked, Herbie, I think they would have accomplished something more than what they've accomplished this year. They know going into next year they need a quarterback. Maybe, like I said, the fact that they started Teddy Bridgewater, they've already determined. They've already made that answer, you know, that they've got to go out and get a quarterback this offseason. I tend to think that's the most likely scenario, is that the Broncos are going to be in the quarterback market looking for a veteran guy, you know, somebody that's an improvement on Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. But you know that Drew Lock is going to be fired up to face the Chiefs, especially in the season finale. And matchup-wise, it's really interesting for the Chiefs to me because the Chiefs got burned on explosive plays, one-on-one coverage last week. Nobody likes to throw the deep ball more often than Drew Lock does. If he's got a guy one-on-one, it doesn't matter if that guy's open or not. Drew Lock's going to give his guy a chance. So there's some interesting matchup things involved with that as well.
Go ahead, Bob.
Just to chime in a little bit. We've seen Drew have really some brilliant flashes, but getting it to a consistent place and demonstrating that he can live up to the potential, for lack of a better term, that's exactly what the Broncos needed to figure out this year, as Sam put it. And they're just kind of left in limbo with that. Drew has a chance to put a punctuation mark on the season with this game. It's always interesting to have Drew come back here, in part because, of course, he's from here, but also, his dad played for Andy Reid at Missouri. And so there's an interesting long-time relationship there. And Drew has not had the kind of day he'd like to have against the Chiefs yet. And I'm sure that's a real motivating point here in a lot of ways for him this week.
What strikes me about Drew Lock is, if y'all remember in 2019, when Tyrann Mathieu, of all people, came away impressed with Drew Lock and said the kid's got a future. So to see how his path right now in Denver has progressed, it is kind of disappointing for people who do follow him. And I believe, if you were to ask Drew Lock, he would probably say the same thing, that it has been disappointing. The Chiefs, though, let's talk injuries real quick. Clyde Edwards-Helaire missed practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. Lucas Niang, who suffered a knee injury against the Bengals, didn't work. But that's a season-ending injury, so the Chiefs are probably going to make a move on Friday with a player from the practice squad. Sam, if Edwards-Helaire does not play, or do you think he will play? Because Andy Reid said, hey, there's a chance. He said that on Tuesday, but 2 straight missed practices. What do you think they're going to do with Edwards-Helaire?
Yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to play him. I think that the ideal scenario would have been that you got the first round bye and you gave him an extra week. And, that's out the window. So now if the whole goal is to get him back for the playoffs, that you've accelerated his timeline, that he needs to get back. I still think in order for him to play in the first round, you'd like to see him out there in some capacity today. Now we'll see. Maybe they're, we know he's doing work behind the scenes, right? Even if he's not on the practice field. So, but Eric Bieniemy said that Darrell Williams had his best game, and Harvey, I should kick it back to you because you asked Darrell Williams a couple questions, and the Chiefs are pretty high on what he's been bringing to them lately.
Yeah, Williams has the opportunity right now going into this game to set a career mark with 1,000 total yards in the season. He's never done it. 4th year in the league. Just needs 37 yards, just 37 yards, and then he'll be fine. Well, when you look at him as well as Derek Gore, Vahe, do we believe that the Chiefs should rest Edwards-Helaire for the playoffs?
I think the prime directive here is be ready for your first playoff game as much as you can be. And I think that means you gotta sit Clyde again. I mean, we don't know his full condition, right? But I think the Chiefs have shown us a tendency to err on the side of caution. One of these days, I'm going to get out some kind of matrix for an Andy Reid decoder on what comes to pass when he says things like, what was the phrasing that he used about he's got a chance about Clyde?
Yeah.
I think, at least in my mind, that usually means ain't going to happen. But I can't swear to that, and I think we could have some fun putting that together. Sam McDowell, you're the best man for that. Why don't you get on it?
Well, the good news is he didn't use the phrase day to day, because if he had used day to day, he's out for the rest of the year. I think we all will agree on that.
Especially if he said literally day to day.
That's a day to day thing. Okay, Coach, we won't see him until the end of the year. Hey, as we get ready to wrap this up here, let's go with some predictions here. Sam, I know you do your predictions, but Vahe, Broncos 7-9 at Empower Field at Mile High. That's a tongue twister to me. What's your projection? What's the X factor in this game for the Chiefs to come out with a win?
I think they'll have the offensive juice they need. And I think the Broncos are a little bit of a wild card to me offensively. I don't know if we've seen a little step back with the Chiefs defense or if we've just seen a blip, but I'm going to say roughly 31-21 Chiefs.
Sam?
Yeah, I think the Broncos are a wild card overall because I think it's pretty well known within that locker room that it's probably Vic Fangio's last game. Sometimes that can get a team up sometimes when you're out of the playoffs, you feel like you don't have a lot to play for, and that part of it shows. So it's very tough to predict what Broncos team we're going to see. Having said that, Vic Fangio defenses have given Patrick Mahomes trouble. So I don't know that we're going to see the same sort of consistency we've seen from this offense over the last 4 weeks if they can ride that momentum into the playoffs. But I don't see how the Broncos are going to score a lot of points. So I do still think the Chiefs win. I think the defense gets back on track in that sense. So I'm going to say about 24-13 Chiefs.
I'm also going to pick the Chiefs. They're going to roll in this game. This should be their 13th straight win over the Broncos dating back to the 2015 season. I think the wild card here is the defensive secondary, how they're able to step up because, like you said, Drew Lock will throw deep, and he does have receivers. That's the key thing here.
Yeah.
The Chiefs go from facing the Bengals receivers, now they face the Broncos receivers, and they do have some capable weapons over there. They're going to get Jerry Jeudy back. He was activated off of the injured reserve, but I don't think ultimately at the end of the day, the Chiefs should roll in this one. I'm going to go 35-20, the Chiefs in a blowout win in Power Field. Had to look in Power Field at Mile High. And that should be a wrap for today. For Sam McDowell, Vahe Gregorian, and producer Todd in the background, I'm Herbie Teope. Thanks for watching, and we will see you Saturday, not Sunday, Saturday after the game.